and welcome to Health Matters on Channels Television. Thank you for joining us. I am Mary Alale Yusuf. HIV stigma is negative attitudes and beliefs about people with HIV. It is the prejudice that comes with labeling an individual as part of a group that is believed to be socially unacceptable. Discrimination takes it further by treating people living with HIV differently from those without HIV. Examples could be a healthcare professional refusing to provide care or services to a person living with HIV, or people refusing casual contact with someone living with HIV. There were an estimated 38.4 million people living with HIV at the end of 2021. That's globally. 2/3 of whom are in the WHO African region. That would be about 25.6 million. My guest is Assistant Chief Legal Officer and the legal focal person on stigma and discrimination of people living with HIV at the National Agency for the Control of AIDS, NACA, Mr. Adeoluwa Ayewumi. You're welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Let me start by asking you, well, first of all, refusing someone medical care because he's positive is preposterous. I didn't know such a thing existed. Are there other things that people do which constitute stigma or discrimination commonly in Nigeria?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, there are other acts that constitute discrimination towards people living with HIV and AIDS. If you take a look at the HIV and AIDS Anti-Discrimination Act that got passed in 2014, Section 6 clearly provides that it is an offense to discriminate against anyone on the basis of their real or perceived HIV status. And then that section goes further to list acts that would be considered as discriminatory, one of which is what you had said earlier, a medical professional, doctor or healthcare worker, denying a patient treatment because the patient is HIV positive, denying someone employment because of their status, denying someone admission into universities, schools, educational institutions, denying people loans, insurance, credit facilities because of their status, and prohibiting intending couples from getting married because one of them is positive, and stopping people from accessing public services, amenities, having access to religious facilities, and so on and so forth. Those are clearly listed in the Act as discriminatory acts against people living with HIV and AIDS.
Yet they still go on. Are there people who still believe that if they touch someone with HIV, come into contact with someone with HIV, that they'll get it? Do we still have people like that?
Oh yes. We do actually, sadly enough. But it's our work at the National Agency for the Control of AIDS to ensure that we create awareness and we make people realize that HIV should not be perceived in that manner. I can, to an extent, one can understand why that has been, because when HIV was first, the first case was diagnosed sometime in the early 80s, it was sort of a mystery. People didn't know what it was. There was no treatment at the time, or hardly any treatment. It was not accessible. So you found out that people who tested positive for HIV quickly transited to AIDS and passed on. And it now became a sort of scare that, oh, once you have HIV, you are going to die. Or once you have HIV and I touch you, I might get it and I might die. So there was that fear in the initial stages. But over the years, there's been a lot of technological advancement in treatment, in prevention. There's now more knowledge and more science as to what HIV is, how it can be prevented, how it can be transmitted. So it's part of our responsibility as an agency to try and put the word out there and create awareness and make people realize that HIV is not a death sentence. HIV is like any other chronic ailment we have today, like diabetes, hypertension. You take your drugs and it's properly managed and you can live your life to the fullest. In fact, with the advancement in treatment that we have today, you can actually take your drugs and be undetected and even being unable to transmit it to someone else, which is what we call the U equals U. It's untraceable within your system and is untransmissible as well. So these are some of the aspects of development that have taken place that we need to tell people about and make them know that this is no longer the case.
Okay, following through from that, U equals U then means that an HIV positive person can marry an HIV negative person and not pass the disease onto the partner or the children. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Once you take your drugs and you adhere to your regimen, the virus will not be traceable within your system. And once it's not traceable, it will be impossible to transmit it to someone else. Based on the recommendations or advice of a physician, the partner who is negative would usually be advised to also be on some form of treatment, which we call PrEP, to forestall transmission, but it would be untraceable and untransmittable within that partner that is infected. And then for children, we also have the PMTCT program, which is the prevention of mother-to-child transmission, which forestalls pregnant women giving birth and passing on the virus to their children. And it also, even after birth, still moves on even into breastfeeding, preventing them from passing on the virus either through breast milk while taking care and raising up their children. So there's been a lot of advancement, and it's good that we start to talk about this nowadays so that people get to know what HIV is as of today in the national response.
Maybe to dispel some of these perceptions, we should refresh people's minds about how exactly HIV is transmitted. Please take us through that.
So there are different means by which it can be transmitted. One of the fallacies that has existed is that it's only transmitted through intimacy through sexual intercourse. And this is also one of the reasons that has created the perception you spoke about, because people now start to think, oh, you must be an immoral person just because of maybe they have different cultural or religious or moral beliefs, that you must be a wayward person, or you are probably not keeping to one partner, and things like that. But the truth is that that is not the only means through which it can be transmitted. It can also be transmitted through blood transfusion, where the blood that is being transfused is infected with HIV. It can be transmitted through the use of infected needles or injections. This usually occurs amongst people who inject and take drugs, drug users. You find out that they tend to share needles and other paraphernalia. It can also be transmitted through exchange of bodily fluids, which would also take into consideration your semen and during sexual intercourse, And then when you have very deep sores and you come into contact also with bodily fluids of someone who has the virus, it's also possible that transmission could occur.
Perhaps one of the fears of employers, in not bringing in people who are living with the disease is that they cannot carry their fair share of the workload. Can you speak to that?
That perception is very wrong, Mary. The fact that someone has tested positive to HIV does not mean they are not physically fit. Just like I said earlier on, it's just like someone who has any other chronic disease, diabetes or high blood pressure. It has no effect on their physical fitness, most especially if they are adhering to their treatment, taking their drugs. So that is a wrong perception that we also need to change. In fact, if you take a look at the Anti-Discrimination Act, Section 9, clearly states that for an employer, an individual or institution that wants to employ someone, taking a HIV test should not be a precondition for employment. And it makes it an offense to do that. So this clearly speaks to the fact that your status should not be the basis on which you are employed, because it has no effect on your physical fitness or your mental capacity.
But it would have an effect if the person were not to use his or her drugs. So how does someone in a position of authority, an employer, for example, make sure and have an accountability system to monitor such a person? I mean, if he doesn't take his medication, then he can infect somebody, can't he?
Well, it depends on the type of occupation or work that that person is working at. Because if you are, for instance, working in an office, a bank, there is actually no activity that puts you at high risk of transmission. Because at no instance are you exchanging bodily fluids or sharing needles with your colleagues in the office. So the risk of transmission are actually very low. That, first of all, needs to be understood. And then secondly, it's also the responsibility of the employer to ensure that he creates reasonable accommodation within the office space by ensuring that there's an enabling environment for everyone within that work environment, so that if anyone living with HIV and AIDS is within that workplace, the chances of transmission are largely reduced. He can do this, just like you said, by conducting regular trainings on what HIV and AIDS is, what transmission is, what steps can be taken if there's an incident that an occurrence of transmission might have occurred, and ensuring that he also removes barriers that might hinder the workers from having equal opportunities and having an enabling environment to do their work.
Okay, we've got to go on a break now. We'll be back soon. Please stay with us. Welcome back. It's Health Matters on Channels Television, and we're talking about addressing stigma and discrimination in HIV. If you have questions on the topic, call 0808-054-2233, or you can send a message to moalale@channelstv.com. Let me ask you this, sir. Has anybody come to you with a complaint that you had to take to court?
Oh, yes. We've had numerous cases of complaints bordering upon discrimination and stigma. And luckily, like I said earlier, we have a legislation that covers that, which is the HIV and AIDS Anti-Discrimination Act 2014. There are some cases we have currently in courts that I probably would not want to speak about here, not to raise prejudice, but I can talk about some that we have had in the past. One particular case was someone who got terminated at his workplace after a routine medical test was carried out in the office, and he was identified as being HIV positive. He immediately reached out, and we engaged with an organization called Lawyers Alert, who are a body of lawyers that provide pro bono services for people less privileged, left behind, and people living with HIV and AIDS. And they took up the case in court, and after several sittings, the matter got to judgment, and it was actually won in favor of the man that lost his job, and he was given a huge monetary compensation and offered his job back. So that has been one success story. We've also had an incident where someone took an employment, a recruitment test, was successful, was told, given his letter and asked to go and carry out medical tests which would be attached to his acceptance. And in the course of doing that, it was discovered that he was HIV positive. And then the organization looked for a way out of it by no longer recruiting him. And he now later found out that even his status had become a common discussion in that office, which of course is an offense. And he also brought it up with NACA. Being an agency of government, that's where he was seeking employment at, we engaged them directly. After a couple of meetings, of course, they tendered an apology, and he was given his employment letter. And so that matter didn't have to go to court, but we've had several of such cases. We've had instances where we've had to engage with universities who have denied admission, maybe to students upon discovering that they are HIV positive. So there's been there have been numerous cases on this, yes.
Speaking of treatment, you've mentioned that there's a cocktail of medication that can actually reduce the viral load such that it cannot be transmitted on to another person. I'm wondering if we have enough of that it would cover all persons living with HIV, because people get to all sorts of mischief in schools, and that's the only reason I could think that a school would say, you know, we don't want this person here. We understand that it's discrimination, it's wrong, but the people actually have a point if they cannot monitor that treatment is as effective as you say and is being taken regularly. How do they address that?
Okay, first I would like to state that currently in Nigeria, we have an estimate of about 1.9 million people living with the virus. And as of today that I speak with you, we have close to about 1,630,000 persons on treatment already. So that is a very huge huge mark that had been made.
If I may butt in, sir,
on treatment.
Sorry to butt in. Let's quickly take a call from Okorafo.
Yes,
hello, Okorafo.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's your question?
Yeah, my question is this. Today in Nigeria, when the people hear that somebody is when people hear that somebody has HIV, what they do, they look at that person as the ailment is a taboo. But what I want to tell the doctor, that there's need for the doctors, at least, all those places people go for treatment, the awareness, people should know that the ailment the person having is not a death sentence. So that people will not be stigmatization, because it's not that is it not good for government to make it a law that if you're some person be employed, at least in the process of employing that person and within the environment at the time, it will also be educating others so that they will do what? Know the need for that. There is nothing that is bad. That what is that whatever you have to have, at least have to be what?
Thank you so much, Okura, for...
all of us,
I think I've lost you there, but I got the substance of what you were saying, and I think that has been addressed in this discussion, that people should have spaces in their offices where they educate people about HIV and AIDS, and how having HIV is not a death sentence, and how one shouldn't discriminate or even stigmatize by avoiding such people or putting them in, refusing them company. That has been addressed in this discussion. Thank you so much, Okura, for that was a good one. So, sir, you were saying about the universities and how people, whether there is access to a way to monitor the usage of drugs and whether they are being used properly and when they should be used, so that the incidence of spread will reduce, or at least the fear of spread.
Yes. Like I said earlier on, if you take your drugs and you are adherent, you would ultimately become U is equal U, which is untraceable and untransmittable. So we've come up with support groups in facilities. These support groups help to ensure that people that come to pick up their medication are constantly monitored, constantly counseled, and constantly encouraged to continue to take their drugs. We also have a network of people living with HIV and AIDS, which is a national network, has national coverage. They also do a lot of community work, reaching out to people, even at the community level, who are on treatment, and ensuring that they remain adherent and take their drugs. There's also a program to follow people who we call who have lost, we call them lost, who have stopped taking their drugs, who are no more longer adherent. There's a program to follow them up. This is at the community level, at the facility level. They place phone calls to you, try and find out why you haven't come to pick up your drugs, and if you found somewhere else where you are picking them up from, and if not, you are encouraged to do so. There are instances like when we had COVID, where there were even
we've run out of time
to actually deliver drugs to people.
Sorry to butt in. We do have to come to and wrap up this program now. Thank you so much for coming on the program and enlightening us. We should have more of this. Mr. Adeoluwa Ayewumi from NACA on the show. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you also for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And thank you for being with us from your homes and wherever you're watching, day and night, wherever you are. I am Mary Alale Yusuf. Have a wonderful day.